Hello and welcome to the programme. A UN-backed report is sounding the alarm on Lebanon, warning of a lost generation. Well, warfare has left nearly half of the country's youth without jobs that match their skills. Unemployment has reached the 30% mark, rolling back Lebanon's development more than a decade. Well, all of this can be traced back to Israel's invasion of Lebanon, its fight against Hezbollah back in 2024. But more than a year on, the political future remains murky. Well, earlier on today, a US delegation, including top envoys Thomas Barak and Morgan Ortagus, met with the Lebanese leaders at the Babda Palace in Beirut. Washington is pushing a plan to disarm Hezbollah by the end of August, but the group is flatly rejecting those calls, even warning of civil unrest. So what does all of this mean for the future of Lebanon? Well, let's get more now. We can cross to Beirut and speak to Hanin Al-Sayed, who is Lebanon's Minister of Social Affairs. Thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us, Minister. Lebanon has had a tumultuous decade. A lot has happened. There was the financial turmoil. There's been the Syrian refugee crisis. We just had the 5-year anniversary of the port explosion earlier on this month. Then there was Israel's military operations in Lebanon. Does it feel now like Lebanon has turned the corner and is rising from the ashes?
Thank you, Tom. Yes, indeed. I believe Lebanon is rising from the ashes, as you put it, starting with the election of a new president earlier this year. Then, of course, a new prime minister, a cabinet formation, which actually took place at almost record unprecedented speed, a cabinet which is very coherent. Both the president and the prime minister's speeches were historic. And as you know, of course, also this cabinet took some historic decisions a few weeks ago. Each minister, including myself, have been working 24/24 on our different files. I believe the citizens of Lebanon have very high expectations, and rightly so. They have come from, as you mentioned, multiple crises over the past few years. So it's time now really to be as responsive to our citizens and within the context of the changes, of course, that are happening in the region, put Lebanon first and do the work that needed to have been done years, if not decades ago.
All of what you're saying is making me feel like we're off to an optimistic start with this discussion. And as Minister for Social Affairs, I'm assuming you've got a major role in rebuilding the country, because on social fronts there is so much that needs to be done. What would you say are your top priorities, and how's the progress?
So, unfortunately, Lebanon, because of the multiple crises that you mentioned, we're now facing very high poverty rates, increasing poverty rates, rates that have doubled and tripled over the last 10 years. So this is a big challenge, and one of my priorities, of course, is to reduce the poverty. In fact, I have been talking about zero poverty. Now, we know this is highly aspirational. However, I think it's important to put that out there as an objective of our government. Part of, or one of the ways to address poverty reduction is through a robust, effective, equitable social protection system, which is exactly what my ministry's mandate is, to have a universal social protection which is rights-based and which offers citizens, if not talking about each of them is to have universal service, but they should be able to access different kind of social protection services at different parts of their life cycle where they need it. So this is really at the heart of, this is the priority of my ministry. So to provide the Lebanese citizen with as much protection as possible. At the heart of this, of course, is a social assistance program. Already we are implementing it. We are reaching 20% of the Lebanese population through a program we call Aman, a cash transfer program, which provides monthly support to families which are under the extreme poverty line. But there's other, of course, very important categories of society which need support and which have been impacted heavily by the multiple crises that have hit Lebanon. These are people with disabilities. We've had an increase in, of course, injuries that have, whether it be from the port of Beirut, from the most recent war, and this is a group of population which is highly vulnerable, which is in need for government support. Elderly. Lebanon is one of the fastest growing aging societies in the region due to multiple issues, of course, related partly to out-migration, the very fast brain drain, but to a natural aging of the population. That's another priority for my ministry. Of course, at the same time, there is the very big challenge of the presence of a very large number of displaced Syrians who have been in Lebanon for 14 years and which have, despite international support, which has been generous, but it is decreasing, and this has become very difficult for Lebanon to be able to carry that responsibility and cost, if you will. So there's multiple challenges, all of which are priorities for the Ministry of Social Affairs. And yet we are working at each of these files to ensure that we can provide the best service to the citizens.
Thank you, Minister. And, and I'm going to ask you in a moment about Syrian refugees. But before that, I just want to cast our minds back a year. I was reading an article and I'm triggered by what you were saying there with regards to the brain drain. And this article talked about a lost generation in Lebanon, a generation lost to some of the things you mentioned there, poverty, socioeconomic disintegration. At the time, the article said 1.2 million people were displaced by violence in Lebanon. It said that tens of thousands of buildings were destroyed. Unemployment, it said, was around the 30% mark. Food poverty in some areas. GDP, it said, had shrunk around 38% between the years 2019 and 2024. I mean, how much of those metrics changed these last 12 months?
So I think there is a change. Of course, the 1.2 million displaced that you mentioned, these were the first impact of the war, the last war in Lebanon. But almost within 48 hours after the war ended or stopped, let's say, or the hostilities stopped, let's put it that way, about 1 million went back to their place of origin or neighboring areas. And so we still have a problem, however, of displacement. And I've just announced recently a program for the IDPs, internally displaced persons, Lebanese, who are still displaced from their homes as a result of the recent war. So this remains a challenge, but it's been sized down considerably, and we are addressing it. Many of the other issues that you've mentioned about GDP, decline and poverty increase and high unemployment, of course, these are structural issues that we need to address, and we are addressing them through reforms. The government statement, upon which we got the vote of confidence from Parliament, was very clear about the kind of reforms that are needed. Essentially, we need to get the economy growing again. We are at a much lower base or size than we should be. And that's going to require a lot of reforms on the banking side, of course, on the fiscal side, on electricity, internet. So there's a whole basket of reforms, but this government is working on them day and night. Every minister, as I mentioned earlier, has been spending his or her time on these files. And with the leadership of the Prime Minister, we have made made a lot of advances. Judicial reform, as you know, we've passed also the law for independent judiciary. So I think that with this kind of progress, we hope that some of these metrics you mentioned will start to turn around. Already we are potentially seeing a 5% growth in the second half of 2025. Tourism was very positive this summer. Still not over, and we're expecting good returns. We have indicators from supermarket sales, for example. These are also up. So many indicators that we have at a micro level are coming together, are indicating that we are starting to turn from that curve or from that bent that we have been at for years now.
Okay, and with regard to the brain drain that you mentioned yourself, and this time a year ago again, young people were feeling like they had no choice but to seek out a future in another country. They were leaving Lebanon. Are we starting to see that trend reversed? I mean, I don't know if you have any numbers for me, but anecdotally as well, do you get the impression that people are now stopping their mission to seek out their fortune elsewhere?
I can tell you from some personal experiences of children of friends who are in their early 20s, some of whom already have come back. They've been studying outside, and they've come back, and they want to set up here. They want to do startups. They want to engage. Now, this is anecdotal. We don't have major numbers on return on brain gain, but I believe just from feeling it, and also those who have not come back, but there's many aspire that when they finish their education outside, they want to come back. Look, Lebanon is a beautiful country, and not just because I'm Lebanese, but because it offers a lot. Now, if we can ensure security in all its forms, which is something, of course, which we are working on as a government, if we can ensure, of course, decent jobs, in the end, this is what the youth want, our jobs. And bit by bit, as we undertake these reforms, we can start to see the private sector picking up, because in the end, it's the private sector that has to create these jobs. And this is we're starting to feel that. And then, of course, good education, which we are also proud to have still, nevertheless, despite some of the setbacks of the last few years, which not just Lebanon had in terms of education, but globally because of COVID and other reasons. So I think once we start getting these basic elements back, we will see increasingly the youth who want to aspire to come back. Myself, in the Ministry of Social Affairs, we have programs for the youth, and they are very active, very inspired. So we hope that, and we're already starting to see some of this change happening, that this ball will start to get bigger and bigger as we roll out more of the reforms that we plan to do. And don't forget, our government has been here now barely 7 months, and what we have achieved in 7 months have not been achieved in 7 years or more in Lebanon.
Sure. I mean, you have huge challenges, and as you say, you haven't had very long to address them. I wanted to ask you about Syrian refugees in Lebanon. Today, we saw pictures of refugees leaving Lebanon today. At one point, there were 700,000 registered Syrian refugees in Lebanon, but some people said the number was more like double or triple that number. I just want to ask you, what sort of numbers are leaving, and what does it mean for Lebanon if they are leaving?
So, thank you for this question. Again, this is one of the files, if you will, that our government has achieved very good progress, despite all the challenges. If we take a UNHCR number of 1.5 million, and there's different views, but let's just take the official number of UNHCR of 1.5 million Syrian displaced or refugees, whichever name you want to use, in Lebanon. By UNHCR's numbers, 170,000, roughly, cases have been deactivated from their database, i.e. have returned and have been literally deactivated. And another 71,000 are waiting for the process of going back. So we are saying about within barely 2-3 months of our government's approval of a return plan, we're seeing almost 250,000 refugees going back. And I myself was in some of these settlements, informal tentative settlements in the Bekaa area 3 weeks ago, and I was surprised, but many of those camps have been vacated. And I talked to some of the people that were still lingering around. Many are expecting also to go back. Now, as you know, our government has put in place what's called a return plan, which includes financial incentives and also waivers for fines. We worked this out with the UNHCR and with the international community who is supporting us financially in implementing this plan. We have very good cooperation with the UNHCR and IOM in terms of data exchange, in terms of logistics. We want more. We hope that there will be, this return will accelerate. Now, for sure, the Lebanese economy needs foreign labor, including Syrian labor, and this is where we are working to also what's called organizing the labor market so that we identify our needs, whether it be in agriculture and construction or other areas of the economy, and we then formalize those workers through work permits and the like, so that this way we have what Lebanon needs in terms of labor force is provided. At the same time, the Syrian families can go back safely and with dignity back to their country.
Sure. It's been a very busy day in Lebanon today. A big delegation is in town, meeting with President Joseph Aoun. You've got the U.S. Special Envoy for Syria and Lebanon, Thomas Barak, accompanied by Morgan Ortagus. We've heard from Thomas Barak that the country is going to come up with a plan to get Hezbollah to disarm. And I'm wondering whether your understanding of that plan could include the use of force.
So, as you know, in our cabinet meeting earlier this month, we took the very historic and brave decision as a cabinet to where we put a somewhat of a timeline that would facilitate and sort of the boundaries or the borders of where Lebanon needs to be in terms of arms, so that the bottom line being that all arms should be in the hands of the state, including those of Hezbollah. And we tasked the army to come up with an actual plan. Now, the army has been working very diligently on this. We are expecting a cabinet meeting on September 2nd, where the plan will be presented to us. We will discuss it, and that will be the moment really to have for us to have a look at it as ministers and see where we can go with this. Personally, I believe force is not the answer. We want to have cooperation on this from all groups, just like what started to happen with the Palestinian camp last week. So this is where the role of diplomacy and also building dialogue across groups, and this is something that my ministry also is planning to work on, build the social cohesion, bringing people into the state who have been out of the state for not just years, for decades, and to show them that the state is there for them. In the end, the state is the only answer to make all Lebanese citizens of all confessions and all political groups to make them feel safe, to bring them jobs, decent education. So this is really ultimately the objective, and I think nobody can say no to this. I'm not underestimating the difficulty in getting there, but I have confidence in the Lebanese people, and I believe we will get there bit by bit, and as we sort of take these steps, build the consensus, and hopefully we'll really have a much more prosperous country for everyone.
And Minister, one of the other things that came out of the meetings in Beirut today was this plan for an economic zone in the south of Lebanon. I think the thinking there is that will provide job opportunities for people who otherwise might want to join or remain in the ranks of Hezbollah. That's going to be partially funded by Qatar and Saudi Arabia. Just tell us what sort of news, what does that represent for Lebanon? Is that welcome news, and what impact might that have?
I mean, let me just say that creating jobs for our youth is our priority. how and the like is, of course, a government strategy. This is part of what we as a government are putting together. This is not to be dictated from the outside. Now, of course, we seek the help of our friends, especially in the Gulf countries, and hope that we would have, already we have a very good cooperation, and we hope that this will increase. But absolutely, creating jobs for our youth is important. And all over the country, I was in the north recently, in a city like Tripoli, where unemployment rate is very high, and yet there's many skilled youth in digital and AI and the like, which are looking for jobs. So, as I mentioned earlier, most important thing is to create an environment where private sector can come in and invest in Lebanon.
Another piece of news out of Beirut today, hot off the press, the former central bank governor, Riyad Salameh, is going to be released on bail of more than $20 million US dollars. What do you think is going to happen to him? What should happen to him?
Well, I think a lot of people believe that justice needs to be served, that those responsible for the financial crises, of whom the former governor of the central bank, of course, has a big responsibility. He's not alone, but he is obviously a very responsible, was in the midst of the whole financial engineering and, let's just say, bad governance that brought Lebanon to where it is. So it was news to me as much as it was news to everyone else, and I think we're waiting to understand, what's behind that and the reasons. But absolutely was a surprise. Let me put it that way, at least for me.
And just lastly, to wrap up this conversation, I mean, when you see the sorts of people who've been in Beirut just today, and these announcements with funding from the GCC countries, close allies, it looks like the Arab world, indeed the whole world, wants to see Lebanon succeed. There is an enormous amount of goodwill and support for your country. What's your vision for the next 10 years? Are you optimistic?
Yes, Tom, I am optimistic. The Lebanese people need just a little bit of stability and can bounce up. We've actually seen it throughout the last decade. Whenever there's some peace and quiet, let's put it that way, the economy picks up. The Lebanese are, I hate to use the term, but they are resilient. And with the basic economic reforms that we're putting in place, institutional reforms, security reforms, financial reforms, economic reforms, social reforms, human capital reforms, I'm very confident that within 10 years you will see that Lebanon has gained back its economic power as it is for a country of its size, and is growing at a very good rate. And our youth will be back. We'll be exporting knowledge and technology. And this is really what I think the Lebanese people and the youth wish for Lebanon. And as I mentioned in the beginning, I am optimistic about this, and hopefully just what we've achieved in the past 7 months compared to what's been achieved in the past years, at that rate, we will hopefully be at a much better place in 10 years, if not before that.
And just lastly, I mean, I'm wondering whether there are any parallels with any other female political figures whom you might see as role models. And I'm listening to you and thinking of the words of prime ministers in my childhood, like Margaret Thatcher, who said, if you want something said, you ask a man, but if you want it done, you ask a woman. And I'm just wondering whether, as a woman in this job of Minister for Social Affairs, you bring something to the table, something special, something additional.
I certainly think so. First, specifically in the area of social affairs, I do believe it takes a woman to get this job done. With all due respect, of course, of predecessors who have male ministers, but there's a certain maybe passion that we might have for this kind of work. But I do believe that We need, Lebanon is on this path of actually having a better gender balance. We're way behind other countries, including in the region, in terms of female representation in political sphere. I'm hoping that this will be with the 5 ministers that are in the current cabinet of Prime Minister Salam. Next cabinet will be maybe double that number. And I do believe female ministers do make a difference. We also become role models for for women and girls in society that you can achieve just as much as any male minister.
All right, or arguably even more. Thank you very much indeed. We really appreciate you taking the time to speak to us. You've been very generous with your time. Haneen Al-Sayed, Lebanon's Minister for Social Affairs. Thank you again.
Thank you, Tom.
In other news, for the first time in 22 months, famine has now been officially declared in Gaza. Well, the UN calls it a man-made disaster, a failure of humanity itself. Well, a new report from the Integrated Food Security Phase Classification, the IPC, says more than 500,000 people in Gaza are already facing catastrophic conditions, starvation, destitution, and death. And by the end of September, it warns things will only get worse. Okay, we're going to stay with Gaza and turn to our next guest, who is Humza Yousaf, the former First Minister of Scotland. Thank you very much indeed for being with us once again here on Al Arabiya English. I remember when we talked before, we talked about your in-laws, your parents-in-law, who are now back in Scotland. They were, of course, trapped in Gaza, Elizabeth and Majid al-Nakla. I wanted to ask how they're doing and also how the rest of the family is, because you still have ties, don't you, to Gaza?
We do. Thanks, Tom. It's good to speak to you again, though I wish things had improved since the last time we spoke. In fact, they've, of course, got much worse. And every day it seems like the situation is worsening and becoming more horrific. In terms of my in-laws, what can I say? They are traumatized. I think they will always be thus, I'm afraid. And in terms of the family in Gaza itself, my wife, Nadia, she has her first cousin, Sally, there. Sally has 4 children and a husband. And those 4 children, as every day is going on, are losing weight, becoming emaciated, and are starving in front, not just of her eyes, in her arms. So how can I possibly describe that situation? Are there any adjectives left to describe the horror that the people of Gaza are facing as a daily occurrence? So I don't really have the words to tell you how horrific the situation is for Nadia's family in Gaza. And of course, that is replicated amongst hundreds of thousands, in fact, millions of families in Gaza that are left there living this daily nightmare on a daily basis.
Now, thank you for that update. And I mean, I wanted to ask you about something you've put out on X, because you wrote on the platform formerly known as Twitter in response to yesterday's bombing by Israel of the Nasser hospital in Khan Yunis. You said something that began, "Dear Prime Ministers and Presidents." Presumably had the British Prime Minister in mind when you started writing that. What would you like him to be doing?
Well, I'd like him to take some meaningful action. Today, the UK Prime Minister has described that double tap bombing of Al Nasser Hospital. Let's remind ourselves what we saw. We saw an Israeli airstrike on a hospital, killing journalists, killing civilians. And then as emergency workers went to rescue the injured, another airstrike followed. And this one was actually caught on camera. We know that's happened many times before. The Israeli Prime Minister calling it a mishap. A mishap is when you accidentally CC in the wrong colleague into an email. It's not when you kill emergency workers and bomb a hospital. So the UK Prime Minister today has responded by calling that, and I quote using his words, indefensible. Well, if that action is indefensible, which of course it clearly is, then why on earth does the UK government continue to sell weapons to the government of Israel? Why does it continue with RAF reconnaissance flights that directly give intelligence to the Israeli regime? And why on earth do they continue to train, the UK army continue to train IDF soldiers? So at the very least, the complicity, the support that we give the Israeli regime must be completely withdrawn, and then proactively sanctions must be imposed on a nation, a rogue nation, that is clearly, completely and utterly out of control.
I mean, you've repeatedly drawn parallels with apartheid South Africa. And I'm wondering if you're doing that because you think that the same sort of action that was taken then needs to be taken now.
Well, firstly, I'm doing it because, of course, it is the ICJ itself that has said Israel's policies in the West Bank are a breach of the Apartheid Convention. This is not Humza Yousaf's subjective opinion. This is the ICJ who have said that Israel is in breach of its obligations against apartheid and racial segregation. That's first and foremost why the comparison is being made. And secondly, that yes, we know that in particularly the 70s and 80s, the measures taken by the international community, by nations across the world to isolate South Africa, to essentially boycott South Africa, particularly in relation to sporting and cultural events, and to impose meaningful sanctions, was the only way that ended up resulting in the dismantling of the apartheid regime. So all these statements of condemnation, these feeble words that are coming from presidents and prime ministers across the world in relation to Israel's actions are falling on deaf ears. The only language that Israel will understand, I believe, is meaningful sanctions.
Yeah, I mean, in the case of South Africa, I mean, the sanctions took 3 decades from the early 1960s to the late 1980s to have the full effect. And of course, the UK and the United States came on board very late in the game. And, you know, the people of Gaza don't have 3 decades to wait. But do you think the bottom line is that Washington can stop Israel? And why don't they?
Yes, you're right. Of course, people of Gaza don't have 3 decades. They barely have days. I mean, there is mass starvation, deliberate mass starvation, of course, which the IPC has confirmed is famine in Gaza City, likely to spread across the whole strip. So we need urgent action, meaningful action, tough action that is going to ensure that Israel changes course. But of course, you're right. As long as the United States provides carte blanche, then Israel will continue, I'm afraid, to commit breaches of international law with impunity. So what has to happen? I think if you are truly an ally of the United States, then all of those that might have influence with Trump's White House have to stop pandering, have to stop simply turning up to the White House full of platitudes and praise, but actually begin to say that, look, we are facing a genocide that is taking place. I don't think there's anybody that seriously doubts that anymore. And we do not want to be complicit in it. And we do not want you to be complicit in it. So look, there has to be measures that are taken. And if the United States is unhappy at those measures, then I would urge countries to work in concert with each other in the way that, for example, Ireland, Norway and Spain did last year in order to come together and collectively recognise the state of Palestine. But urgent action is needed. Otherwise, there won't be tens of thousands of people that will lose their life. It will be hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people.
Humza, yesterday we spoke to an Israeli academic who suggested that the people of Gaza be relocated or rehoused, I think he said, to other countries. And he gave Indonesia as being one of the other countries where they might be rehoused. I mean, what's your reading of what Israel is trying to do in Gaza and, for that matter, in the West Bank? What are they trying to achieve?
Ethnic cleansing. I mean, it is the textbook definition of ethnic cleansing to forcibly remove one people and replace them with another people. That is the textbook definition of ethnic cleansing. And of course, Israel has form. If I think about my wife's grandmother, who was 16 years old when the Nakba happened in 1948, she was living in her home in a town called Julis, which no longer exists, near what is now called Ashkelon. She was told to leave her house for a couple of weeks, and when the fighting calmed down, then she'd be able to go back home. 77 years later, she, of course, will never return home. She's been made a refugee for a second time, and she was, of course, one of around 700,000 who were forcibly displaced, removed, dispossessed from their homes in 1948. So Israel has form of forcibly removing and ethnically cleansing people from their land. And that is exactly what they want to do with Gaza. Now, if Israel does not stop, not only will they completely flatten, as they have done, Gaza and populate it and ethnically cleanse the population. The real prize for them, of course, is the West Bank, where they've already continuing to approve illegal settlement after illegal settlement. So this is a rogue nation, and the only language a rogue nation will understand will be meaningful sanctions and tough action from the international community.
Specifically on this idea of Indonesia, I mean, what's your reaction when you hear someone saying, an academic in Israel, saying that the people of one place should be moved tens of thousands of kilometers away and transplanted, so to speak, to Indonesia? What goes through your mind when you hear that?
Well, I think every decent-minded person will think that that is an atrocious suggestion, which is an attempt to ethnically cleanse a population. But let's be clear, if anybody sees the clips, translated clips of Israeli talk shows or a number of Israeli politicians, including, of course, senior government ministers, that will not come as a surprise. They openly talk about, nay, they boast about ethnically cleansing the population of Gaza. So I don't think ever in my lifetime have I seen both a genocide live streamed and those who are committing the crimes boast in open about their intentions with the population to ethnically cleanse them. So we're being told what Israel wants to do, and the international community, I'm afraid, is passive, letting it happen, and it's people of Gaza that are suffering as a result.
We all watch coverage of what's happening in Gaza all around the world. People are seeing the horrific images, and then we hear Israeli officials giving justifications or denials for what we're seeing. What personally is the thing or the message you hear from Israeli commentators or senior figures that you find most irritating and most dishonest? Is there one thing that really stands out for you?
Well, a number of things, but of course, when the Prime Minister of Israel talks about the IDF being the most moral army in the world, I'm afraid the nation is becoming the most immoral nation in the world, because what it is doing, and the government is doing, is, of course, war crime after war crime, whether it was 5-year-old Hind Rajab, who is in a car peppered with 335 bullets, whether it's journalists, whether it's humanitarian workers, whether it's hospitals, whether it's schools being bombed. Every single convention, even in war times and conflict, is being broken by Israel and broken with impunity, breached with impunity. And what I would say to the international community is, if you even take Gaza and Palestine out of the picture for a minute, what you are doing is setting a precedent that says that every single country can now have impunity to break international law, because there'll be no accountability. There'll be no accountability even if there's an ICC arrest warrant wanted in your name. And the global ramifications for that make our world a far more dangerous place, not a safer one.
Turning our attentions to where you are now in the United Kingdom, I'm just wondering how divisive this issue of the plight of the Palestinians is there in the UK. I mean, would it be too simplistic to say the division is on political lines, left, right, or is it more complicated than that?
It is more complicated than that. Look, there's good people, even in, for example, the Conservative Party, who have been advocating for the rights of the Palestinian people. I give a special mention to Kit Malthouse MP, who I think has made some phenomenally good contributions in the House of Commons. And he's a Conservative Member of Parliament, who again is not talking about being pro-Palestinian or pro-Arab or pro-Muslim, but simply pro-humanity. So there are people across society, across nationalities, political divides, backgrounds, ethnicities, who again are not supporting the Palestinian cause because they somehow are biased towards Arabs, Palestinians or Muslims. It's because they are witnessing the scenes of genocide live streamed on our televisions every day and saying humanity is losing here, that we are losing every shred and every ounce of our humanity if we do not stop this. And there cannot be repercussions and there cannot be accountability for the slaughter of 17,000 children and over 60,000 innocent men, women and children.
You didn't mention the British Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer or David Lammy, the Foreign Secretary there. Do you think they are simply not speaking up enough? Their actions and words are inadequate?
I think they're in danger of being complicit. That's the problem. They are making statements that say that the actions of Israel are indefensible. I think David Lammy yesterday described the situation as a moral outrage. Well, you cannot claim it as indefensible and it's a moral outrage, and yet continue to sell arms, weapons, provide intelligence, give support, continue to support the infrastructure of occupation and indeed genocide that is taking place at the moment. So, of course, their actions are wholly inadequate, and I'm afraid are, in my view, making them complicit in one of the worst crimes of the century, certainly the worst crime that I've ever seen in my lifetime.
Just watching British television, there's been, some protests in the last couple of days. I mean, there are always protests, it seems, but I mean, there does seem to be a tense political climate in the United Kingdom at the moment, and a rising nationalist sentiment, which isn't new, but the trend seems to be continuing. I mean, what do you make of what you're seeing, and do you see this issue of the plight of the Palestinians as somehow feeding into this political set of circumstances?
Well, look, frankly, every single issue ends up being sucked into the culture wars that seem to be consuming the UK, Europe, and most of the Western world. I could tell you that the sky is blue outside, and somehow that would be a controversial statement that I'm making. So the culture war, I'm afraid, is consuming every single issue, including, of course, the Palestinian cause. In terms of the so-called anti-immigration protests that we're witnessing in the UK, including we've seen some here in Scotland, are not happening in a vacuum. You've had 20 years, if not more, of anti-migrant rhetoric from the main political parties in Westminster, whether they be Labour or Tory. And that, of course, at a time when this country requires immigration. We have the lowest birth rates on record. We have an ageing population, and that, of course, is the story of the Western European continent. This country and this continent, indeed, relies on immigration. It relies on the contribution that migrants make, and yet has created the most hostile atmosphere for migration. And it will lead to not only societal catastrophe, but economic collapse.
And yet, I mean, looking at the latest opinion polls, it seems like the Reform Party, with Nigel Farage very much as its figurehead, are riding high in the polls. What do you make of that? I mean, are we looking, do you think, at the future Prime Minister of the UK, Nigel Farage?
I don't think there's a single political commentator that would bet against Nigel Farage, at the very least being the leader of the opposition, possibly even getting the keys to 10 Downing Street, and shudder at the thought that this is a man who's claimed, often insinuated, that Muslims don't share British values, that has said that some Muslims are a fifth column in this country trying to kill us. If there is a dog whistle to be blown, then you will find Nigel Farage at the front of the queue with his lips pursed and ready to blow. So we have here a very dangerous individual. His reason for support, of course, is because of the political failures, particularly of Westminster parties. We've seen with the last Conservative government, the biggest fall in the living standards since records began. So if people's weekly shop has gone up, if their mortgage has gone up, their rent has gone up, their electricity bill, their gas bill, all of these bills have gone up, and they've had a Conservative Party, a Labour Party, then of course they're going to try something new, something different. And that's why I think Reform are seeing their support in the polls riding high, including here in Scotland, where I am. That should worry every single decent-minded person.
Right, you say you shudder at the thought of Nigel Farage as the future British Prime Minister. And as a Muslim, I'm wondering what that would mean for you, such a prospect. What would it mean for you and your family? Would you go and live somewhere else? Would you sort of close the door on the UK?
Well, look, I wouldn't want to do that. I love Scotland. It's my country. I was born here, raised here, raising a family here, and I had the great honour and privilege of serving my country, both as a government minister, but also, of course, for a period as the head of government, as the First Minister of Scotland. So, you could cut me in half and I would bleed Scotland. So I don't want to leave my country and wouldn't want to be forced out of my country. At the same time, the other role, responsibility, in fact, the most important role and responsibility I have is as a father. And with the United Kingdom becoming more and more hostile to Muslims, to the point where we've had bricks thrown through mosque windows. We've had the attempted terrorist attack in a mosque in Scotland, in fact, with the individual, a teenager, being charged to 10 years in prison for his affiliation with neo-Nazism and his attempt at that terror attack against a mosque in the west of Scotland. So if the climate becomes so unsafe for Muslims, many Muslims, myself included, of course, will be questioning whether our children can possibly be safe in this country. And if not, then we will be elsewhere. And again, that will not be good, clearly, for society, I would argue. It certainly won't help the economy of the country if all the Muslims decide to pack up and go elsewhere, as many on the far right have been calling for.
Okay, and just, I mean, before we just close and one last question about Gaza, I just wanted to ask you, I mean, you're quoted as having said sometime last year that people make a living out of vilifying Muslims. And I mean, obviously it sounds like you think Nigel Farage is one of them. Who else did you have in mind when you said that?
Well, I think there's plenty of examples you can see online of these hate preachers. Today I just saw a woman who is looking to be, I think, a Republican candidate in Texas, taking a flamethrower to a Quran in the name of free speech. And that is the kind of world we're living in. Somebody who wants to be taken seriously as a candidate in the local parliament, Senate, taking such action. So there are plenty of people, I'm afraid, who have made a living and are making a living of being rabidly anti-Muslim, and many of them get platformed. You will hear many an anti-Muslim statement that I can point to from the likes of Melanie Phillips, and yet she is given a platform in the BBC with regularity. So time and time again, Islamophobia, the hatred of Muslims, is not just accepted, but is platformed on our mainstream, and that is entirely, in my view, unacceptable.
And that's a good place to end this conversation, because I wanted to wrap up by asking you about your criticism of British broadcasters, in particular with regards to their choices of words relating to the situation in Gaza. What sort of words do you criticise them for using or not using? And do you think British broadcasters have an agenda on this issue?
Well, I think what a lot of broadcasters, and I put the BBC in this category, tend to do in the name of impartiality is bring balance to a situation that's fundamentally imbalanced. So how on earth can you bring balance to a situation where one group of people, in the case of Gaza, do not have an army, are not an independent nation, who are being bombarded by one of the most sophisticated military machines that are dropping 2,000-pound bombs on their heads? That's not a balanced situation. That situation is systemically and fundamentally imbalanced. And so what we see from often again the BBC, but they're not the only one, is such poor choice. One has to wonder if it is deliberately poor choice of wording in order to mask the true reality of what is happening. And that can be in the West Bank, where the BBC recently had a headline calling settlements a controversial plan. They're not controversial, they're illegal, of course, under international law. Or often when they're reporting about Gaza, they simply mention that dozens of people were killed. Well, killed by whom? And often talking about the Hamas-run health ministry in Gaza, but not when they mention Israel, don't mention the fact that is a government led by a man who's wanted by the ICC for war crimes. And look, the other thing I would say about, I'm afraid, that Western media, that with a few notable exceptions, because there has been some notable exceptions, the fact that so many journalists have been killed in Gaza, you have barely heard a peep from Western journalists about their colleagues being slaughtered in such numbers. And I think that is extremely shameful and extremely regrettable.
Okay, well, it's been great speaking to Humza Yousaf, former First Minister of Scotland. Thank you for your time. And I do hope that if you're in the Middle East, you will come and talk to us. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Well, for more, we're joined now by Tirza Leibovitz, who's Deputy Director at Physicians for Human Rights Israel. Thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us. I want to start by asking you about your decision to categorize what's happening in Gaza as a genocide. In Israel, that's something not a lot of people have done, a lot of people refusing to use the term genocide. I'm wondering why you're using that term and whether you faced a backlash for it.
So with Physicians for Human Rights Israel, we had been in touch with Gaza, with our colleagues in the health system there for many years, sending many joint delegations to Gaza, and also have been documenting violations that had begun way before October 7th. Let's talk about the blockade, siege on Gaza, the killings during the March of Return. However, following the Hamas massacre on October 7th and beginning of October 8th, we began documenting unprecedented attacks on hospitals. Already early in October, there were 22 evacuation orders for the 22 hospitals out of 36. So that already was a signal that there was something here that was beyond what we had seen before. And as we continued documenting the violations, we turned our eyes and documented as well the killing of doctors and members of medical teams. Again, unprecedented. To date, we know of more than 1,600 doctors, nurses, paramedics. They serve as the spine of the health system. When you kill 6 directors of Al-Shifa hospital, that decimates capacity to provide care. We also documented the blocking of evacuation of the wounded and the sick. So even if there's no war going on, there are sick people. Add to that the wounded and the injured. And we, as the health capacities were being dismantled, we were trying to arrange for some routes of evacuation, first and foremost to the West Bank, which is close by and the most natural place to do so, and also as a fallback to third countries. And this we had failed to do in any meaningful way. Most of those who needed acute care remained in Gaza. And so it goes on and on. The blocking of the provision of medical supplies and, of course, humanitarian aid. Then if you broaden your outlook and you talk about the social determinants of water, arable land, issues of domicile, of housing, of education system, all of these were being dismantled. And once we began seeing that, we understood that the place to, or the framing that would capture best what we're seeing on the ground would be the framing of genocide according to the Genocide Convention. And I think most people, when they think of genocide, they probably attach it to the definition of genocide that follows, I would say, in a very unfortunate way, follows quantity, follows many people being killed, injured, or harmed with the intention of destroying the group or part of it.
Okay.
Here, in addition to seeing those numbers, we were seeing something happening in addition, which was unprecedented, and that was the attack on the conditions of life in Gaza. And the Genocide Convention has an actual article or definition of that as deliberately inflicting conditions of life that are calculated to destroy a group or part of it. We can talk about the calculated side of it, but I can say in short that the pattern, the unmistakable pattern and the extent and scope of the destruction were indicators for us about this intention. We were also backed by international jurisprudence, although that's something that is being there's a discourse on it, of course, with international terms. It was important for us, once we understood it that way, it was important for us to go through the investigation, both on the ground, which we were doing anyway, but then to consult also with different experts. And once we saw that we had a strong legal analysis here, we came out with this decision.
All right.
In terms of backlash.
Sorry, let me just interrupt you there. So your argument is clear. The legal basis for saying this is genocide sounds like it's carefully considered and clear as well. But the use of the word genocide, for very obvious and tragic reasons, is presumably a taboo, something of a taboo in Israel. I don't know if you agree with that. But what has been the reaction to people in Israel when you've used this term?
I would absolutely agree that it is a taboo. As a human rights organization, we have the obligation to put a mirror to what is happening. So for us, it was clear that that is what we are going to do. I think it's also important for the society in Israel who have been used to the use of genocide in a very particular context, to have that mirror to see another context in which the allegation is that they are the ones who are acting out this genocide. It is difficult. It is more difficult for the people that are undergoing this genocide. So for us, this was a clear step to take once we had, again, the factual understanding of that, as well as the legal one. I can say we were concerned to some extent about the response of the government. There are ways that the government can shut down organizations. It has been taking some steps previous to this coming out with the report, and we're concerned about additional, maybe sharper steps. I think that was our main concern. At the other side of things, we have seen both in Palestinian society, in Israel, if I talk right now about Israel, in Palestinian society, the Palestinian people in 1948 borders, as well as some parts of the Jewish constituency in Israel, a relief that an organization that is based in Israel, that the restrictions as well as taboos is actually giving what they're seeing a name. I think we also, I would say one more thing, that we also felt the need to stand in solidarity with our colleagues in Gaza, especially the medical professionals. As I said before, Physicians for Human Rights Israel knows the Gaza Strip. We have been conducting delegations of Jewish and Palestinian doctors, over 100, to the Gaza Strip for many years. These are people that we have been in touch with. We continue to be in touch with. We hear, we receive, we can get on the phone with them as things are happening. We're receiving the information and the data, and we needed to stand in solidarity.
Okay.
I would say one last point for the many motivations for coming out with this is that we're an organization that works with and vis-a-vis and in front of the medical profession in Israel. And we felt also an obligation to put this mirror before colleagues, doctors in Israel as well.
All right, and when that's put to the Israeli government, they say the idea that there's a genocide in Gaza is completely baseless, to use their terminology. A spokesperson for the Israeli government, David Mensa, said it simply doesn't make sense for a country to send in 1.9 million tons of aid, most of that being food, if there is an intent of genocide. What do you say to that?
I would say let's look at the facts on the ground. And I would even address the situation now, where we know that after a complete blockade between March and May 2025, there has been the establishment of the GHF, the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, and there has been some entry of aid. And now let's look at the results. We have the IPC, the foremost expert organization made up of governments and independent experts, coming out and assessing the situation now as aid is coming in as a situation of the highest phase of starvation, famine in some areas of the Gaza Strip. And I would go even further. Let's look at the calorie count, if one must do that. And we see the calorie count of most households way below the basic minimum. The attack that we saw just yesterday on Nasser Hospital shows that the actual attacks on healthcare, in addition to civilians, is continuing. So talk about the sending of aid and even giving it a quantity doesn't mean anything about the entry of that aid. When that aid is provided by a weaponized entity, when the system that has been there, the UN, together with local and international organizations that have expertise and are neutral and have been providing that aid, are being dismantled, that's what one needs to look at. One needs to look at the facts on the ground in terms of what's actually being consumed and what is the medical situation of the people on the ground, and also the methods of distribution of aid, because those two together can explain why the situation now of famine exists, and if things don't change fundamentally, will become worse.
Okay. And just lastly and briefly, if you will, I mean, I'm detecting from what you're saying a sense of revulsion, even a sense of shame at what the Israeli government is doing to the people of Gaza. Are you ashamed? Does it make you ashamed to be Israeli when you hear and you read about what the reality is for the Palestinian people in Gaza?
I'm here in two hats. One as a human rights activist, as part of an organization that is based in Israel, which has a staff of Palestinians and Jewish people. And this is the advantage of having an international law where we can get around. They're defined, they're objective. In other words, we provide an objective analysis, and that's what we put forward. Now I'm speaking as an individual, as an Israeli who lives in Israel. I'm ashamed to be of a people that is for whom these allegations are made. Absolutely.
Okay, well, we really appreciate you taking the time to speak to us, and thank you for your frankness. Tirza Leibovitz, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
That is all we have time for on Global News today. Thank you very much indeed for watching. Be sure to join us again tomorrow for more exclusive interviews. Until then, bye-bye.